Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. There's no surefire way to accomplish anything in life, but with each conversation, we aim to delve into diverse topics, present fresh perspectives to empower you, our fellow colleague, on your own journey to success. I'm your host, Eden, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be joined by a former recruiting specialist who is now honing his skills toward organisational development, and for the last 5 years has been helping the continued development of the first fully remote organisation at Giant Swarm, an open source cloud native development platform. With an extensive experience in today's topic, I'm extremely excited to peel back his knowledge and share it with you, as well as the experiences that the team have had along the way. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcoming today's guest, the HR manager at Giant Swarm, Mirco. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. Looking really much forward to the conversation and hopefully some nice insights.
Nice. Well, before we dive into today's topic, which we'll kind of introduce in a moment, as always, I want to start off talking about you, kind of your background. So what got you into, let's talk about the world of talent acquisition to begin with, and then moving forward into where we are today towards more HR?
Yeah, pure chance, actually. I never really, like when I studied back in the days, I never really planned to actually work in HR or the people space as such. Did my studies in linguistics and never really had any touch points with that. But after finishing studies, I got an offer from a company that I used to work for as a student to join them in Berlin in a HR talent mixed role. And from there, basically started my journey from, really small sized startups to medium sized grown ups to now I'm reluctant to call ourselves a startup anymore because we're now slowly approaching the 10 years. But definitely a small company with a startup vibe and mainly in tech, more or less always in tech. And that was always my focus. Then over time, I guess that sort of comes naturally because the way I look at recruiting and talent acquisition is really more of a holistic way. And I don't see recruiting as such being a discipline on its own because you can have the best recruiting team, you can have the best recruiters. If your onboarding doesn't work, if your employer branding doesn't work, then they will never be able to make their job. And from that perspective, I got more and more involved into topics that are outside of the classic HR talent acquisition role. And got more and more involved into organizational development, taking care of people in the long run, making sure that the organization grows in a way that it's healthy, in a way that we can actually sustain and keep the talent and no longer need to constantly find new people, which is obviously the smarter and I guess cheaper option as well. And therefore, sort of a natural development into a broader role, I guess.
Nice. And it's going to kind of touch upon what you want to talk about today, which is, setting up a team to be ready to hire as a fully remote team. So before obviously we jumped on click record, you kind of explained to me how long you've been doing it versus how long Giant Swarm have been doing it. So just for the listeners, give us kind of insight into those two elements and why I guess we're going to kind of tackle this from your perspective.
Yeah. My remote journey sort of started with Giant Swarm. It was the first time that I actually worked remote, and that's now more than 4 years, nearly 5 years ago. And Giant Swarm is remote since the very beginning, so since 2014. Since the very beginning, we had people all across the globe and started out very much experimenting with the first things when it comes to remote. We had situations where people were still coming over for interviews to Cologne, to the head office, so to speak. It's a small co-working space, but still, and do presentations there. Nowadays, we do it fully remote just because it was no longer realistic to fly people in on a daily basis. Since then, fully remote, doing obviously fully remote recruiting, grown the team from when I started. We had Anna, our VP people, and Larissa, who was doing recruiting with us, and Tia, who is still with us. And that was us. And nowadays we've grown quite significantly. We have our own area facilitator team, which takes care of the organizational development. We have a recruiter who is specialized really on recruiting and exclusively doing that. We have now our own people ops engineer who is taking care of engineering topics within the people team, supporting us with finding the right tools, experimenting with those, and automating a lot of things. So we sort of grew the team based on the needs that we had over the past 5 years or the past 10 years, to be precise, and grew it more and more to be this talent acquisition or / people team, taking care of all things in a remote company when it comes to people topics.
Yeah, I think, we'll touch upon kind of the elements we go into, but I think, going back to, it's been 10 years or nearly 10 years that the company's been a fully remote company. It's not just a quick COVID kind of fix and stick into it, which I know a lot of people had to do and did do. And we're now in this weird in between where you've got some teams that are for it, some teams absolutely against it, some are sitting in the middle, they still don't know where they stand. So I guess this kind of podcast today is going to really be arming people, specifically talent teams, with several key components you should be looking at. And to really start hiring fully remote, this is the elements you should be focusing toward. So before we look into those, you've hired on site and you've hired remote. What do you think the biggest difference is?
Remote seems to be easier in the very beginning. I guess that's the biggest difference, because suddenly you have this amazingly huge pool of candidates from all across the globe, ideally, and it's no longer your small bubble of wherever you live, whether that's Berlin or whether that's London. It doesn't really matter, because it is a limited pool that you can only source from. And with the step to becoming remote and the step to hire fully remote, you suddenly have an incredibly huge pool of candidates that you can source from. You, at the same time, have a lot of, challenges to integrate these people. You have suddenly a team that becomes more and more diverse, with people who are not in the same location, which is a huge factor when it comes to sharing and team building. You don't have the shared component of people being in one place and having sort of the same experiences in that place. They don't have the favorite bar that they can all have in common and talk about. They don't have the same football team. They suddenly probably will not even have football as a common denominator or sport that is the go-to sport in the country. Suddenly everything becomes more diverse, and with that also your processes, also your basic setup, your tooling, your languages, all of these needs suddenly become more and more important, and therefore I guess it becomes easy on the one side, and harder on the other. The actual recruiting, I guess, easier. The things you need to keep in mind in order to successfully recruit in the long term and in a sustainable way, way harder, way more complex. But if you ask me, way cooler, way more exciting, more diverse, more interesting. You meet so many great people from all across the globe. You get so many new insights, so many new ways of looking into things and onto things, which is, in my perspective, one of the greatest assets of hiring fully remote.
I mean, I've done mostly on-site hiring or hybrid hiring, the last decade of doing it. And it's obviously been since COVID we did remote. And even now, I would say I've got a handful of companies that are fully remote. One, which is remote first and has been since pretty much the same period, to be honest, as Giant Swarm. And you're absolutely right. Recruitment looks easier because you go from having, say, 2,000 people you could look at in the local market to 20,000. But that also brings the massive challenge of you cannot go through every profile. So your sourcing methods need to be better. You need to be a better equipped kind of talent partner to your hiring manager to truly deter who is good, who is right. So you're not wasting time. There's so many different things you have to think about, which I think it takes a little bit of time to get your head wrapped around. So hopefully, what we'll go through will help people and kind of carve through that quite quickly. Or if they're stepping into a remote role themselves and never done it, we should be able to do it. So there's three core elements that that you've kind of explained to me that we'll go through, and it's basic setup. And then on top of that, well, after that, shall we say, we need to have the right tooling in place. But even with those two in place, we still need to have the right mindset from the people as well. And those trio of elements have to come together in order to be a successful remote team. Is that right?
Hopefully, I would say. I guess there are, apart from these three core elements, there is a lot more to actually be successful. These are what I would consider the setup and the things you need to keep in mind at the very beginning.
Sure.
And for me personally, it's very important. All of these things are very, very specific to each company. Something that might work at Giant Swarm will for sure not work in a different company. And even though it's super successful here, it's maybe a complete failure in a different company. And therefore, you really need to try out what works for you, what works for your team, what works for your company best. And experiments are the key to that. And you just have to go through them. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it takes time. It takes money. But if you want to do something right, I think you have to try it out on your own, and you have to make your own experience. What I can share is what I think are valuable things. The basic setup, I guess, is something to start with. It's the real key things. You have to have the right hardware. Your team cannot hire a remote if they're working with computers from the 1990s. That's not going to work. It's that simple. So you need to make sure that you give the people the right tools, that they have a nice audio setup. I'm sitting in front of a good microphone. That's something that each recruiter at Giant Swarm gets when they start with us.
What about
to
your
make
headphones?
Sure. Sorry.
What about your headphones? I have to say
I
it.
lost these.
I had to say it.
No, that's totally fine. I personally decided at some point headphones are good, but I prefer not to use them because it's just nicer for having a conversation. So it's nicer for moving
I'm going to
around
have
a
to
bit.
dig you out now. For anyone who is going to be listening to this, Mirco's headphones stopped working before we clicked record. So I do have
Sorry
to
for
point
that.
that one out. That doesn't reflect Giant Swarm's budget on the equipment that they offer to the teams by any means. That was
Absolutely not.
a technical issue that we didn't foresee.
Yeah, 100%. The good thing is, and that's part of how we do it at Giant Swarm, we have a budget for that. So each month I have an allocated budget for things like headphones, for a new mouse, for a new keyboard, for a new camera, and things like that. And also covering things like my internet connection. Another of these basics. I cannot hire if I have an internet connection that constantly breaks down. Impossible. Yeah. Hopefully that works now. But these are basically the very, very basic things. You need to have a good place to work. And again, also that is super different. Within Giant Swarm, we have so many people doing so many different things regarding their workspace. Some people prefer, and that's me, for example, having a quiet office space. So I have my own office room at home with a proper setup, with a screen, with a microphone, with a camera that's adjusted in the way that I like it. Others work from a van, completely different setup, but at the same time, they need to be able to have a great internet connection. They need to be able to work with their setup. And as a company, it's our responsibility to sort of make sure they get the right tools at hand. They then need to use them and need to bring their setup to the right way. Again, super individual. Each person needs to find their own happy place, so to say.
Do you have, sorry, just to interject, because obviously that whole element, it sounds obvious, right? It doesn't sound like it's groundbreaking. Does the person have internet? Do they have a machine that works? Does it have enough, storage and RAM and all that good stuff and cameras, etc.? It seems like obvious things to do. In an office, you'd likely have one person that's responsible for this. They might have a checklist that they would be doing. But the things like internet, we know the internet because it doesn't change. Hopefully it doesn't change in the office. But when you're working from home, do you as a collective team, when you're onboarding somebody or pre-boarding, do you have like a checklist? Your internet must hit X amount. You must have this leveled machine. And again, we would provide it if you don't have it. But How do you go out and work out where they are today and what you need them to be at in order to be successful?
Yeah. Yeah, we have a checklist. Simple as that. We have a work from home checklist, which basically gives you a guide on what you should have. Very
Mhm.
important. We don't force you to use a certain type of computer or something like that. You get a budget at the very beginning when you start with Giant Swarm, and you use that budget to buy whatever machine suits you best.
Mhm.
Because we have people who prefer to work with Linux. We have people who prefer to work with Apple or Windows, and therefore each and everyone is individually on their own, and they need to decide what they want to buy, and they buy it on their own. And we give the framework. And I guess that's the important part. And if there is a situation that someone's internet is lacking or things like that, then under normal circumstances, the teams actually take care of that on their own. And they will talk to the person and they will be like, hey, Mirco, actually, your internet really isn't at its best at the moment. Can you please make sure that it gets better? So far, we never had an issue with that. I can see in big corporates that this might become a bigger issue. At the same time, we are lucky that we are a tech company, and most people at Giant Swarm actually take care of that on their own, and they have an intrinsic motivation that their internet works, and therefore never had any real issues with that. But if so, a guideline helps document what needs to be the standard, and then just take it from there.
So make it as clear cut. You're onboarding somebody. This is the checklist we're looking at, but it's about being mindful. You're working remote yourself. What do you need to be successful on your setup, and include that onto that checklist, and work with the person pre-boarding stage to say where are we with that.
Exactly.
Okay, this is slightly off topic, but still in topic. Say I onboarded with you. We have a great working relationship. We're 1 year into our relationship together. Wow, partnership. Employment? We're going to go employment. So what happens if I leave? You know, my machine, all that budget you put into it. What? Because otherwise you're just going to have this immense backlog of completely different machines, completely different equipment that's being shipped around the world. What happens then?
Hopefully you don't have a high turnover rate like we do, therefore no problem. Obviously, it is not sustainable to ship hardware all across the globe. And this is, for example, something that we are currently working on, because we are not happy the way we do it right now. Because yes, what happens? You decide to leave Giant Swarm, you will send your hardware under normal circumstances back to us. That obviously creates quite a big amount of costs. It creates a lot of work on both ends, ours and the lever. And therefore, we try to reduce that to as much as possible. If people decide to leave, they normally get the chance to buy off the hardware from Giant Swarm, so that they actually can still keep it. And if they decide not to, then it's being sent back to the office in Cologne. And then we normally redistribute it,
Right.
and try to find people who are interested in keeping that.
So keeping the circular element behind it, but at the moment it's shipped to HQ. But as you say, it's not
Exactly.
sustainable. So looking into alternatives, I'd be curious once the team have found a solution. I'd be curious about that because I think that's actually one of the biggest problems that remote actually offers from a sustainability impact. Yeah, we cut the costs on travel and office space and all, that part, but there's still, especially for larger companies, that whole aspect. And you're
It's a
right,
huge
if you
thing,
have
yeah.
a high turnover, well, not worse. So work on your culture, work on your team first. Um, but yeah, I'll be curious to see how that project pans out.
I will
You
keep you updated. We have a special interest group that's currently working exactly about that, and yeah, we'll keep you updated.
shout out to the special interest group. You're in my head. You're beating me to the question. You gave the example in the prep stuff that you shared to me. What happens about creating a good working place for very individual circumstances? And you said setting up for a classic home office is one thing, but what happens if someone wants to work from a camper van? So what does happen in that scenario?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're very likely unable to employ that person under your normal company office or a company, well, framework. Therefore, you will very likely need to look into different options, starting first from a contract perspective. So how do you employ someone who is currently traveling all across Europe and is going to keep that state for the next 2 years? There are several different options. Things like freelance contracts are always a good thing, because then the person traveling needs to take care basically of setting up their own company, and they need to take care of paying taxes in the country that they register the company, their own company in. If that is not an option and the person is somewhat stationary in a country, there's always the option of EOR, so employer of record, which is quite helpful, but at the same time can be quite difficult from an admin perspective. So you need to take care that there is someone in your team who is actually capable of handling this admin workload. The same applies for freelancer, by the way. Then there's obviously the classic remote option for, in our case, German contracts that you can nowadays put in there, which is great. That helps a lot, but it's something you need to keep in mind at the very beginning. There are countries where it's quite difficult to hire people. I know, for example, in the Netherlands, the tax situation is very difficult. And there are several other countries like that, where you should really look into what is the actual situation of hiring people. Otherwise, you might run into huge issues. French labor law, as an example, is always difficult. The same applies to Portuguese. So make sure you have an expert in your team who actually knows how it is handled in the different countries, to get you out of trouble, or to make sure you're not getting into trouble in the first instance. And therefore, ask yourself before you make the decision, oh, we want to hire all across the globe, make sure you have the capacity and the knowledge in your people team to actually take care and accommodate for all of these different models. And then even the most obvious things, like how do you get the contract to that person? And with that, we actually get to my next bigger topic, the tooling. It's one thing to ship a contract, or to put a contract in the post, and get it from Düsseldorf, where I'm located now, to Berlin. That's easy. This whole situation might look very, very much different if you want to do the same thing and the person lives in Egypt. Therefore, think about how you can set up your tools and the software you use as a people team from the very beginning, and not just from the recruiting perspective, but from all other perspectives as well, to make sure that your hiring processes are not stopped suddenly because you're not capable of getting the contract over to your candidate. And for me, that really starts with the first contact, and even probably even earlier, if it's about where do you find remote people, where do you advertise, what are job boards that you want to use, is there a specific remote first job board that you want to use, is the option to work remote on your website, are people even aware that they can apply if they are not in the location that your company is? So making sure that this is set up from the very beginning. Then we continue with the actual recruiting process, which I think is
before we dive
probably
into that, just curious, because immediately I'm thinking, what job boards? Where were you advertising? Not necessarily, you haven't got to give all your trade secrets away, that's fine. But what sort of platforms have you seen work quite well for remote hiring?
For our case, it is quite specific. Obviously, you have the normal ones like Remote.io and things like that. What we like to do, and this is something that I always like to do when it comes to recruiting, is be a bit crazy. Like, don't go the normal way. Think a bit around the corner. We started using GitHub quite a lot, which is a developer tool, and they have some amazing lists on GitHub for remote first companies, for even ranked based on different traits that the company offers and things that the company offers. And you can basically just search in GitHub for these lists, and get listed on there if you find a developer who is so kind to support you. or again, you have the capacity in your HR or people team, even better. But this is something that I enjoy quite a lot, and where we get really great success with. But again, very, very tech focused, very heavy tech focus as well. For normal companies, I would actually stick to the normal job boards that are out there. Most of them nowadays have options to list remote. Even your job board that you might use for your own company will nowadays have the option to say, yes, we hire remotely.
Yeah.
And therefore, I guess, don't go completely crazy. Start with the basics and then do the experiments on top. I guess that's always a good start.
I would also just throw maybe some of the things that we've seen. Groups on LinkedIn, Slack channels, they work really, really well. There's always sub threads, especially on Slack, where it's like remote. There's just this whole topic of remote. So if you're in a JavaScript group, just search a channel, see if there's any remote, and throw some jobs up in there if needed. I just literally, as you was talking about, I literally typed in GitHub remote companies, and literally a list of 50 come up. So if anyone's listening and want to do it, feel free. Obviously, then contact the person who's sharing the list. It could be a great way as well. A really simple, actually effective way that, yeah, obviously it's unique to software. But a lot of the people that are listening probably would sit inside this category anyway, so it's still relevant. So we've identified, okay, we know how we want to advertise the remote aspect. One element, of course, there's a lot of different things. Branding comes into it. As you say, people even know we hire remote. But the next kind of element from your side as well is, as you said, the actual hiring process. So when we talk about the tools to ensure that the hiring process is, straightforward, it's fair, it's inclusive, when we're looking at remote, what's kind of the areas that have worked well for you?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm also curious to hear about maybe experiments that haven't gone well, if
Yep.
any.
I guess one important element that we always try to focus on is efficiency and making it as fast as possible. Because yes, on the one side, you now have access to this massive amount of people who are suddenly interested in your jobs. At the same time, these are the people who have access to the jobs all across the globe. And therefore, they will be off the market quite fast. And if you're not fast enough and if you're not able to convince them, then you will have a problem. Therefore, what we try to do is make sure that the entire process runs really, really smooth and that there are no stops within the process. So we normally try to stick to a maximum 3 days of no communication with a candidate rule, so that the candidate never stays untouched for more than 3 days. We make sure that people get automatic replies if they write us an email, that they get automatic replies when they apply, that way around. And that they feel at any given point in time during the process, they can approach us and they can really actively say, hey, Mirco, what's going on? Haven't heard from you. What is the current situation?
Yeah.
Transparency is another key element that we really do care about, not only from the recruiting perspective, but actually from the company culture perspective as well. Therefore, we try to make sure that the candidates have at any given point in time, the feeling that they know what is happening behind the curtain, because they haven't seen you in real life. They don't know if that company is even real. You could just interview them for a fake company. So you need to build up trust as much as possible from the very, very beginning. And the only way to gain that trust is to be very transparent and very open. So if there is any problem that we face during the recruiting process, and there are millions that could occur from, you have two candidates who are running through the process at the same speed and time. How do? You have only one position left. Be honest, be transparent. That is the current situation. Let's make sure that we find a solution for that as fast as possible, but don't leave the candidates behind. If that happens, that's the worst thing that can happen, because they will lose trust and they're gone. And the way we do that is we automate a lot. We automate a lot around the scheduling of interviews, the messaging part, reminders for our people that are involved in the recruiting, that they get instant pings whenever someone is inactive for period X, that they get pings whenever there is feedback missing on an interview, that all of these things are automated. And for us at Giant Swarm, we use Personio, German company, which we are quite happy with. And we have been using it since, well, basically I started, so nearly 5 years. And the way we work with it is in a fairly loose way, but we use it as our framework to actually operate in. So we will always change things. Again, also be a bit flexible when it comes to the candidate. Time zone issues are always something that you will face during the recruiting process when you hire fully remote. Make sure that the tool doesn't control you, but you control the tool. And that is, I guess, a very important advice I would give anyone. If a tool doesn't suit your need, get rid of it. Build your own. Use an Excel sheet. It's terrible. It will probably break your neck at some point, but it will maybe solve your problem at the very beginning. And if you have a tool that doesn't suit you, get rid of it as fast as possible.
It's actually a conversation that comes on the podcast before. We were actually talking about why do we have certain tools, and what's the validity of that tool. Clara, a lady called from Vodka Digital, was kind of going through that process, is that we just fall into having an ATS system because everyone has an ATS system. Why do we actually need to have that? I agree, we do need to have one, but why do we need to have it? If you're a 2-person company, you're right, Excel could probably work. It's about being flexible, as you say, but I really love that. Control the system, don't have the system control you. I also, just going back a couple of points, I really love the fact that you have a 3-day no communication focus, no touch point, sorry. and again, this is from the external side, I even feel at times that the curtain isn't going to us. And you're partnering with that company. And the issue that you then face is that the candidate comes to us to say, what's going on? And you either have to lie, which is terrible, or you have to say, look, I don't know, which makes it even worse, or go to the company, and the company then says, look, go away, like we've got other things going on, we're busy, blah, blah, which is fine, everything happens. But it sounds very much like what Giants were doing, and what you're preaching is just complete transparency on communication. Everyone knows what's happening at every single stage in the process. It doesn't matter if you're involved in the sourcing, doesn't matter if you're involved as a candidate or the hiring manager or an interviewing panel, you know what's happening.
100%. Couldn't agree more with that. Because, let's be realistic. Even if you are a bigger company, it's very unlikely that your recruiting team is so big that if people are out for whatever reasons, vacation, sickness, or whatever, you will always run into a situation where suddenly there is maybe not the person there who is supposed to do the job, but that person is then put on the spot. In the case of yours, it is you being in front of the candidate, having no clue what's actually happening within the company. In our case, you would be able to either get access to Personio through us, which is possible. We can give external headhunters access to our candidate profiles, even GDPR conformant. And the other option is you get an instant update from whoever is there, because putting you in a position where you would need to lie to a candidate, regardless if it's an external person or an internal one from us, would be pretty much the worst thing that could happen.
I hate it. The thing is, when we're saying lie, right, I don't want to sit and say to the candidate, yeah, don't worry, things are going amazing. The lie is person's out of office. I don't know if they're out of office. No one's told me they're out of office, but that's still a lie. And it's still terrible to say, because but when you're saying to you, Mirco, I don't know, the company hasn't spoken to me for 2 weeks or for a week, that also puts red flags into your mind, and there could be something behind the scenes that is a genuine issue that they're trying to resolve. Nothing to do with the candidate, nothing to do with the process. You don't want to create these doubts where there shouldn't be any. But I fully, by the way, back what you're doing as a team. That makes obvious sense. It is the right and only way to do it. There's not enough teams are there, unfortunately.
I mean, if you ask me, the way we do it makes the life of the team so much easier, because first of all, you have the actual stress for the team. Lying is never easy. It's never fun. It's not helpful. It makes you feel terrible. It is terrible for you as a person. But the more important part for me is even it kills your efficiency. Because if I'm not replying to candidates for a week, I have a pile of messages in my inbox saying, "Hey, Mirco, what is actually going on?
Yeah.
Why are you not replying to me?" Terrible situation. I now need to go back, reply to all of these candidates. First of all, hey, really sorry, we missed to actually reply you in time. I will come back to you in a day with an actual feedback. Then I need to go back, check with the hiring manager, see what they think, and then go back to the candidate again. Instead, I can do that upfront, have a communication, for example, towards the candidate before Christmas. That's something that we do every year. 1 week before Christmas and 1 week after Christmas, there is no hiring and nothing's going to happen. And we write that as a message to all candidates that we have in our pool. Hey, sorry, we're actually not sorry. We're on vacation. We're now enjoying family time, we're relaxing, and we are getting some fresh energy for the next year. Totally fine. No one on this planet will say, nah, shitty company, I will not apply
Don't
there.
work for them.
I will withdraw my application.
Yeah.
Exactly. Everyone will be like, okay, cool. Yeah, they're on
But I know where they
vacation. That is
stand.
fine. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the most important part. And therefore, transparency is the key there. And I guess circling back to where we were coming from, you can get that transparency by using the right tools, by making your life easier with using automated messages, scheduled messages that you can set up 4 weeks before Christmas, saying on the 20th of December, we get a message to all our candidates out saying, hey, we're out of office. Problem solved. No one needs to think about it anymore. It was once for 2 minutes in our planning, we discussed it. Then someone set up the message and it's off our list.
I think this element, right, of people listening, I might be seen as bad character, and I'm cool with that. But I guarantee at some point, if you really look back and think, did I say something to a candidate I shouldn't have done to try and get out of a sticky situation? Everyone has done it. I guarantee it. And if you're thinking that now, then you know for a fact that it's time to revamp how communication is being done, how processes are being run. Again, not the core element of this, but candidate experience is one that comes up so many times because it is one of the biggest issues that we still face because we have such diverse processes because each company is unique, but there still needs to be, I believe we need to move some point into some level of commonalities between companies to some degree. I think, then at least the kind of experience it doesn't matter if you're trained by me or if you're trained by you or if you're trained by someone in a completely different country, then it should still hopefully follow some sort of similarities between each other. With obviously the tooling aspect, you also talk about, before we jumped on, about kind of self-service. So once the person is actually hired, and you explained the toolbox. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Starting with the most obvious thing, in Germany, you have to fill out a lovely form that's called Personalfragebogen.
Very rolls off the tongue.
And everyone has to do it. There's no way around it. It's basically you summarize all the information that the tax authorities and other authorities need in order to become an actual full-time employee. You can now do that by sending this lovely form in paper form to the candidate who sits in Bavaria and waits for 2 weeks for the postal service to actually deliver that to them. Or you find a way to do that automated in a nice way. And we use, again, Personio for that. Everyone has their own profile there. They can fill out the information. And during the onboarding, they get an automated message saying, hey, by the way, here is your Personalfragebogen. Please fill that out. You can then upload it. Everyone at Giant Swarm, if you start with us, gets a GitHub issue where all of these things are listed in. And you can just throw it in the GitHub issue. And then someone from our people team will pick it up, will file it properly, and will take care of everything else. The amount of touch points there is reduced. And this sort of brings me to something that I think is quite interesting, because what we try to reduce during recruiting onboarding and whatever phase it is of your employee life cycle, we try to reduce the touch points that create work and the ones that feel like work. So all of these administrative processes, let's try to make them as easy as possible, as fast as possible, and as little as possible. Because then what we get suddenly is we get more time for the actual onboarding, for an onboarding that's focused on culture, that's focused on learning the actual job that people have to do, and making sure that they arrive in the company, that we can take care of them, that we as a people team have the time to support them with whatever issue comes up, that we can maybe organize a nice meeting in the city that they are in with the people who are living around, and that we have time for that, instead of wasting our time for administrative tasks and wasting the person's time for administrative tasks.
It's just about being prepared mostly,
Yeah.
and I think it kind of comes down to as well, sitting there and understanding what do I do once I start a job, or when somebody, and kind of mentally and even as a collective, a hypothetical candidate, someone could be, step by step, what do we legally have to do to have this person in that process, in that job, and then work out, okay, then what needs to be completed, and then from there, how many touch points do they need to have, how many can we automate? Because you're absolutely right, spending more time around culture and more time about building that person into this company opposed to administrative tasks is going to help reduce leavers so soon, which then starts the whole process again. So, you want to get them talking, you want to get them interacting, you want to get them kind of on projects quicker. So that automation component, I think, is really, really important.
And again, we're back to where we were before. Transparency, making sure that the people know what to expect. At the very beginning, they get this GitHub ticket here at Giant Swarm, which is, again, a template.
Yeah.
We don't need to do a lot of work for that. The people team just clicks 3 buttons and we have the ticket created. It covers all administrative tasks. The person can work on it whenever they want, whenever they feel like, well, actually, I have half an hour left because I'm still waiting for the next meeting. They can work on that. If they have questions, they can throw them in there. They will get an immediate answer from one of us as a team because we will be pinged, and we can just take care of that.
Yeah.
At the same time, the person knows, where am I right now? Am I somehow on schedule, or am I a bit behind? Am I up front? Can I relax a bit and can focus on other things? Can I explore the company a bit because I'm done with my admin onboarding? Fine, I'm out. That's great. And they can only do that if they have the transparency to actually understand where they are right now and what they still need to do.
When you're working on site, a lot of the time is somebody from the HR team or people team will be sitting in a room with you going through everything. So you're absolutely right. When you don't have that and you've got you on the opposite end of the country or another country, that's where that ping element comes in. You just say, look, yeah, you're fine, crack on, go explore the rest of the company. Hiring all of these people, doing remote, there's obviously the third element that comes into it, which is people and the mindset, because we can get the tools and we can do the process, but if the people we're actually bringing on board doesn't really work into a remote setup, then it's all just going to come crumbling down very, very quickly. So explain to me a little bit about what you believe the mindset to be for somebody in a remote position, and why it might be different to somebody who does office work or on-site work, sorry.
I'm going to give you an answer that everyone who does interviews hates. Depends. Sorry. But it actually does. I can tell you what it means for us at Giant Swarm and what we learned over the past few years, but it will very likely not apply to any other company. And therefore, I guess one of the first things you need to do as a company, if you want to start hiring remote, understand what you need and understand what you need from the people. And I guess one of the key elements for us is, for example, being a grown-up. We will treat you like a grown-up and we expect you to be a grown-up. Therefore, if you have a question, ask. If there is something unclear, ask. If you find something that's wrong in our onboarding because our documentation is outdated, fix it. You're very likely able to do that, so go for it. So for us, being an adult is something that is a key element, and acting like it as well. At the same time, what we learned is that it is quite hard for juniors or for junior people. I don't like the term juniors, but for people who don't have that much experience on the job, actually, because you have to have a certain maturity to keep yourself on track and to be self-disciplined enough to say, okay, no, back to business now. And I guess that's something that is quite important. At the same time, we have super successful, very young people in the company because they are already way further in their career than their age is actually indicating. But you need to understand that you need to find these character traits within the recruiting process. And I guess even before all of that, you need to have people on the team, and especially on the people team, who want to work remote. Because it doesn't help if the company just decides from one day to the other, we're now going fully remote, and the team is not up for it, because the team says, no, we have a lovely office culture, we love it here. And then suddenly you want your recruiters who love working in an office and who love to have coffee chats in the kitchen, and suddenly they need to sell to people that they can work from wherever they want. That's not going to work out. So you need to have the buy-in from the team, and ideally not only from the people team, but from the entire team, to take that step. And then I guess the last element for me in the mindset question is actually, how do you make sure that people love the company, that they fall in love with the culture, that they fall in love with the rest of the people, and that you create relationships, that you build relationships within the company. And that again then circles back to what I said before: less touch points on the admin side, less annoying touch points, and more positive ones, more having yoga together on a Monday morning in a virtual setup works great. We do that. It makes total sense. The step towards doing that is a hard one because it feels weird.
Yeah.
Especially 3 years ago, it felt super weird. Nowadays, it kind of normalized, but you need to make sure that you create these social interactions, and not just once a quarter, but actually more or less once a day. We use Slack for our communication. We have once per week a morning huddle where people can just join in our random Slack channel where everyone is and just chat, have a coffee chat at the beginning of the day. We have weekly lunch together on Thursday. We have Friday beers that are now moved to Thursday, but anyway, they're still Friday beers.
As long as you don't go as heavy as you would on
we
a
have yoga
Friday.
on Monday. Yeah, I mean, part of that again, we are trying to find the next big thing, or we found it already. Therefore, we are on a 4-day work week. Therefore, no Friday for me, for example. Everyone uses it differently, but something that we realized is a lot of people are off on Friday. Therefore, we move them to Thursday. And again, being flexible. Because remote work requires flexibility. It will lead to situations where you have people all across the globe. And that's, for example, part of why we shifted certain social events a bit, because it was impossible for our US employees to join for the afternoon beer, because for them it would have been a lovely morning snack, which felt a bit
9
weird.
a.m. pint.
And therefore we changed certain events and made sure that it accommodates everyone's lifestyle. And it gets harder and harder the more variety you get from across the globe, and then the more variety in terms of time zone you get. And therefore, then we are back to the very beginning, I guess now. Yes, the hiring as such becomes easier. The processes and everything that follow up becomes more and more complex.
Yeah. And I think that kind of sums it up very, very nicely. You say, coming back full circle, we can't get the right people if the setup isn't right. And you can't create the right setup without the right tools. And you can't give people the best way to work without the right tools. And it all just keeps going round and round and round. So all three need to work, as you say, with other points for sure, but they need to work as like the minimum. There's a lot for somebody to think about around this. There's a lot that I've taken away from this as well. You know, when you say it's all about remote hiring, it seems on paper, oh, it's straightforward. I mean, I would look mostly more towards like, the contracts, the legal side. Does that work? And completely bypass all the other softer elements that are so impactful if you want to build a long-term, sustainable company in the sense of its employees. So there's a lot to unpack. I'm not sure if you're going to convince me to do Monday morning yoga, but I'll be there next Monday. We'll see. If the invite makes its way, you'll see me in my pirouette. If that's a thing, that sounds very yoga-y. I think that might be more gymnastics. I'm not sure now. Something around that. My swan.
Otherwise, Thursday lunch is also
Thursday
fine.
lunch would probably be better, if I'm honest. Yeah. But no, Mirco, I really appreciate you
Good.
taking the time and going through that. And hopefully, obviously, somebody who's listening does find this useful. I have one final question for you. Hypothetical
Go ahead.
scenario, right? I am an IC talent acquisition manager. This is the area I'm interested in. I feel as a collective team, this is the route we're going to be going. What's the number one thing that you would recommend that I avoid around remote hiring?
First thing that comes to my mind would probably take it too easy, because it seems easy on the very first glimpse, but there are a lot of things that you need to keep in mind, and therefore be prepared for a few surprises. Simple as that.
I like that. And what a way to end it. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Have a good day.